Welcome to Contemporary Black Voices, where we examine issues that impact the Black community. Today, I am Dr. Sharon Michael Chadwell, one of your hosts, and I sit on the same panel with Caleb Alexander, who is a New York Times bestseller writer, Fred Williams, who is also a writer, and then Chris Dawkins, who is an activist and entrepreneur here in San Antonio. Today's topic deals with teaching our own while in public school. The education system is in a state of flux given the continued push to remove any truths about Black history in the classroom under the guise of critical race theory or CRT. Now, in a September 2020 report by the National Center of Education Statistics wrote that in 2018, 79% of public school teachers were white and non-Hispanic. About 9% of teachers were Hispanic, 7% were Black. In schools where most students were not white, the majority of teachers tended to be white, as well as the administrators. So for our Black children unable to be homeschooled, it is becoming increasingly apparent they are missing out on learning about their history and are at a greater risk to receive disciplinary measures and simply not seeing representatives of their race in these schools. So today I am excited to have Victoria Dixon, who is a parent of a very bright young boy, teacher, math coach, author, and overall one of our stars in the teaching profession, to offer advice to Black parents on how to navigate the system to improve the learning experiences of their school-age children. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today.
So, there are a lot of questions that, as Black parents, that we have about what about our kids and the risk that our kids are at being in these schools. So, how do we advocate for our kids in these schools given today's climate?
I think it is so important that parents advocate. So I love that you're asking, how do we do this? Mm-hmm. So one of the first things that you want to do is you want to know your child, and you know that by spending time with your child, seeing how they're reading, seeing how they're counting and how their number sense is, like, are they able to do those math computations, sitting down with them and doing their homework. Now, when you start noticing issues with your child, you want to go to your child's teacher. You want to start there, so first thing, if your child is like bored in class and not engaged, let the teacher know some of your child's interest so that the teacher can find ways to incorporate that into their lessons. Another thing to do, you can ask the teacher for extra resources if your child is not understanding the material. There are a plethora of graphic organizers, manipulatives when they're doing math lessons. There's just different resources that children have at public schools, and public schools have a lot of resources. So you want to make sure that you're talking to the teacher, asking for what they can provide your child in the classroom, and if there's any supplemental materials that you can do at the house to continue the learning. I think it's also important that you understand what they are being taught in school. Mm-hmm. So if your child's teacher has a website, or if they're sending home a newsletter, you want to keep yourself abreast of what those items are, and those strategies. And then another thing, if you're having issues with your child's teacher, then you want to go to another level. So you contact the secretary at the school, and maybe you set up a meeting with an administrator so that you can see what is going on. And I just want to say this part. I know you didn't really ask me about special education. I know that sometimes in our community, special education can kind of be like, ooh, I don't want my child to be labeled as a special education child. And there are sometimes, I think, that special education is abused, and people are putting children in these programs that don't need to be there. There are other times when children really need some additional services, and special education can be an amazing avenue. I have sat with students that had some real learning difficulties, and because they had an IEP, an individualized education plan, we were able to make sure that anytime they took a test, they had a graphic organizer or this math material. You know, it could be a hundreds chart, it could be a multiplications chart. It can be something that is going to allow us to actually let the child show if they know the skill and not if you know all these background things that you should have already learned, right? Some children are slow when it comes to mental calculations, right? So whatever resources we can give the child to be successful, that's what I want, and then those accommodations, having those graphic organizers, those math charts and whatnot, they get to use those on state testing. So now when the child is tested at the state level, and guess what? Sometimes they get the test read to them, because we're not like on a math test, we're not trying to assess do they know how to read. So I just think making sure that we are speaking with administration, speaking with the teachers, so that we really are getting the child the help they need, and we're not just entirely scared of special education, because sometimes it is one of the best opportunities for our children.
Okay, great. Now, one other question I have, there's been a lot of controversy about homework. How much time should a child be doing homework? So I'm gonna put it in your lap, especially if you have a young child.
Yes, ma'am. So when I was in the classroom, I would assign homework, and my vision was that the homework would take between 20 to 30 minutes for any child to do.
Is that total?
Total
Okay.
for well, I should say this. As children get older, they will have a little bit more homework. I'm going to speak to 3rd through 5th grade, and, probably even 6th grade, thinking about 30 minutes to an hour for like math, right? And I say math because math is one of those subjects you're probably going to have homework in. You may have a little bit of reading homework. Reading homework may be like read for 15 minutes, read for 20 minutes, but I would say as we're in upper elementary school and middle school, doing homework for between 30 minutes to an hour and a half max, I think is a good range for how long it should take for a child to do homework. A lot of teachers are moving away from homework because some people may not feel it's valuable. For me, some of the homework I used to assign would be watch a video where I'm explaining this math concept so that when you come to school tomorrow, you already understand it. They didn't really have to do a lot of thinking. They were just like, it was me pre-teaching the skill. So, I loved giving that kind of homework, but it needs to be meaningful. So again, to answer your question, for younger children, I'm saying like 2nd grade and below, they should not have more than 30 minutes of homework. Now, that does not mean that you do not enrich your child, right? If you're trying to give your child a leg up, yes, let them continue the learning at home, continue what they're learning at school. There are programs like IXL.com and IKnowIt.com, ST Math. These are programs that you can have your child working on at home to continue what they're already doing in the classroom. And for a lot of public schools, they have subscriptions to some of these programs. They may not have like IKnowIt.com, but a lot of schools have IXL or ST Math. They may have Dreambox, and they can log in at home and continue working. So I would recommend, if your child is up to it, to sit down with them and let them work for at least another 30 minutes on supplemental things. It's just enriching.
Okay. Caleb, with a child in school, still in school, do you have any questions for her?
Yeah, so when you, I guess my first question, thank you.
You're welcome.
And so my first question would be like, when you say 30 minutes to an hour, that's for all classes or is that for math classes?
For 2nd and under, I would say 30 minutes for homework should be what we're aiming towards. As we're getting to 3rd, 4th, 5th, maybe an hour max. Middle school, it is possible that they may need to be doing homework for an hour and a half to 2, potentially. I know when I was in school doing geometry proofs, those took a long time to figure out. But I had more stamina to sit down with some work like that.
Okay.
But enriching activities, you know your child's temperament. You don't want them to like despise doing stuff with you. So 30 minutes of something enriching.
Okay. And I guess I So I do want to talk about your experience in the classroom. And so,
Yes.
in the classroom, let's talk a little bit about social learning theory. And so, when you were in the classroom and you had kids that were maybe of the same demographic, was there a difference? Did you notice a difference in how you were able to get through to them as opposed to a teacher from another demographic? Did you have those kind of conversations? What was your experience with that as far as teaching kids of a similar ethnic background?
Okay, so when I used to teach in DC, I was really blessed to be a Black teacher in a school that was predominantly Black. And the reason I say that I was blessed in that instance is because I feel like backgrounds, we can connect on some levels, and I can share some things from my experiences that matched, you know, and that was a phenomenal experience. And, you know, in that setting, I was able to teach Black history to them, and there was no issue with that. You know, the kids enjoyed it. I remember I was teaching third grade. They loved it. I moved on to fourth grade with many of the same students, and they're like, Miss, at the time I was Miss Payne, oh, can we do another Black history project? And I was teaching math at that time. I was like, well, we're not gonna do the same thing. So I created a Black history project related to math. And so we did a number line, and it was all about fraction and decimal equivalents. So anywho, so that was an experience. Now I'm gonna fast forward to coming to Texas, and none of my classrooms looked like they looked in DC. I've had up to like 50% Black, but by and large, my Black students would represent a third or less of the class population. And so in those instances, teaching everyone, I feel like I can still connect with my students because for me, it's important to always get to know my students.
Okay.
So when I was teaching sixth grade, I had one student, he loved baseball. So I came up with a math review game that was centered around the game of baseball, you know, and so I have him buying it. I had another student when I was doing Black history, they were doing a research project. He was really into skateboarding, okay, phenomenal skateboarder. He was a white student. And what I did is I found out there's this guy, Nigel Johnson, I think is his last name, but he's a Black skateboarder. I assigned this student, this Black skateboarder, for a research project, and he loved it. So I think whatever you're teaching, you can be in a mixed setting. It's important for the teacher to really try to connect with the students so that they want to learn what he or she is teaching them. You know what I mean?
Which brings me to, I guess, interest convergence. And so when you have a Black teacher in the classroom and you see the dynamic that kids are really, really into it, and you're able to expand from math to teaching, broaden that out to other skills. I mean, did you notice was there a noticeable difference?
For the students?
Yeah.
Oh, I will say, yes. I will say yes. And even for me, I've had the entire time I was in school, I was in school most of my time here in San Antonio, a year and a half in North Dakota. I had one Black teacher, and that was Mrs. Harrell, sixth grade English. That was it the entire time. I was in K through 12,
Wow.
you know, and I will tell you, there were times when I realized, especially in middle school, I didn't like what I was learning because I never saw myself in what I was learning. I didn't see myself represented. I didn't like, we're reading about Anne Frank, but that was in a whole nother country, and we're not reading about what happened here. And so even as a middle school student, I took it upon myself to, I'm sorry, am I going too long?
No, but we are going to cut off for a moment,
Yeah.
and then we may have to have you come back.
Oh,
for the-
yeah.
Could you stay for the other segment?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
I definitely can.
Okay, then. So with that, we're going to go ahead and take a break and come back and talk with Miss Victoria Dixon.
Okay. I'm sorry, you guys.
No, my
You got
apologies.